In this video, we are going to check out how to do a minority attack. Not only that, but what is a minority attack, why it is important, and finally I'm going to take out some tests, and finally we are going to jump into the conclusion. So this video is going to be very extremely critical if you really want to improve your middle game understanding. So please make sure to watch it till the end and make sure to share it with your friends. So I don't want to waste any further time, so let's jump in. So first of all, what is a minority attack? Minority attack is basically occurs in chess when one player attacks an opponent's pawn majority with their pawn minority. In other words, when fewer pawns attack a larger pawn chain. For example, in this particular position we have on the board, there is the only difference in this particular position is black is having a pawn on c6 and white is having a pawn on e3. So basically, on the queen side, you will notice on this particular position, black is having 3 pawns and white is having only 2 pawns. So this minority attack can be very useful whenever your opponent is not really having any particular weakness and you want your opponent to create some sort of a weakness so that you can easily target that weakness. So in this particular position, it's white to play and white played the move b4. What is the idea? The idea here is, now white's idea is to simply trade off these 2 pawns with maybe these 2 pawns, so that in the end of the day, black is going to have a weak pawn in this position. For example, b4, h6, a4, the king move, and now we have b5. So now black is having 2 options, either to take the pawn or either to leave it. For example, if black goes for capturing the pawn, after takes, a6 takes, you will realize now black is having 2 weaknesses. a6 pawn is weak and also the d5 pawn is weak. Just imagine having pieces on the board like the knight or the horse, like knight or the rooks. It is already pretty good for white because white is not really having any single weaknesses in the position, whereas black is already having 2 weaknesses. And instead, if black does not capture and he plays something else like g5, white can already take, and you will notice now once again black is having 2 particular weaknesses in this position, whereas white is only having 1. So white can easily target this particular pawn and white is already better. So this is how a minority attack is done. So I think you have already got an idea what is a minority attack. So now let's move on to why minority attack is important. Coming to why minority attack is important. So this particular position that we had it in the previous diagram can be landed with via many different openings. For example, d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6. This is known as the queen's gambit decline. White takes on d5, black takes with the e pawn, bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, ec6. This is a standard way to play this particular position. And you will notice the same thing. Black is having the pawn on the queen side like 4 versus 3. So like you see, this is a particular theme that you can easily implement in your middle game. Like you simply develop your pieces, you castle up, and if you don't have any particular idea, your opponent is not really having any particular weakness, you can just start easily expanding on the queen side, eventually create a weakness and target that weakness, and that's how you play chess. So this is a common way you can easily have this particular idea of minority attack even in the middle games via openings like queen's gambit decline. So now let's move on to a very critical game which can help you to increase your positional understanding to a next level. Okay, so now we are going to discuss the game played between Anatoly Karpov versus Joel Latier. So Anatoly Karpov, who has remained the former world champion, opens the game with 1d4. We have d5 by Joel Latier, c4, c6, knight c3, knight f6, e3, e6. The opening phase is not really that important. Knight d7, queen to c2, bishop to d6, bishop to e2, short castle, rook to e8, rook d1. So both the players are playing kind of pretty normal chess, developing the pieces. Queen to e7, h3, h6, a3. Now, Karpov's idea is to easily expand on the queen side via b4. We have dc4, bishop into c4, and now we have e5. And now we have knight to h4. So you will notice after e5, the f5 square is already a bit weak. Black can even try to go for capturing. White can try to capture this pawn, but it will only help black to advance his pieces in the center. And now black is having a kind of a fine position. White's bishop on c1 has not yet developed, whereas black is having a perfect position. So that's why we have knight h4 with the idea of knight f5 and getting the bishop out of the game. We have knight to f8, and now we have takes because the f5 square is kind of protected by the bishop. So we have first d5, bishop into e5, bishop d2, finally developing the bishop, Bishop goes to c7. Maybe the idea could be to get the queen in and attack via h2. Knight f5, queen to e5, the same idea of queen h2 as I said. Knight goes to back to g3, bishop goes to e6. So now black has developed all his pieces and now black is to be true, having an equal position. We have bishop to d3, rook to d8, knight to e2. You will notice that the white is having a bishop on d2 which is not really doing much. So white decided to move back the knight so that he can put his bishop on c3 at a very nice diagonal. So we have bishop b6 and now we have b4. A very strong move in this position. So you see, if you try to evaluate this position, you can just try to pause the video and try to think what should be the idea of white to continue the position. You will try to think it's quite hard if you're kind of a beginner, because black is kind of having a perfect position. He is having no particular weakness in the position, and he has also developed all his pieces. The only idea I can sense is bishop c3, maybe queen g5, and the game goes on. Okay, but Anatoly Karpov decided to play a very instructive game, which was to use this minority attack by pushing these two pawns to attack these three pawns to eventually create a weakness. We have b4 in the game, knight goes to g6, a4. You see the same idea as I told you. a6, and now bishop goes to c3, the queen goes to g5, bishop goes to d4. Because this bishop is not really doing much, so it's better to trade off the bishop pair. Takes, because if you try to trade off the pieces, in the end game, black is going to have one weakness that you can simply target. Bishop goes to d5. We have e4. Though there were better options like knight df5, but let's not go into that much detail. We just want to look for the plan we are discussing, which is the minority attack. We have e4, the bishop goes to e6. We have knight to f3, queen goes to f4, and eventually we have b5. Takes, and now we have knight to e5. If black would have gone for takes, bishop b5, and eventually you see the b7 pawn is a big weakness. So we have knight to e5, we have a knight trade, we have take on c6, and now we have rook c1, simply attacking the pawn. The rook goes to d6, we have queen to c3, we have bishop to e2, we have a rook trade, we have a queen trade, and you see eventually now black is having a weakness, an isolated pawn. f4, trying to expand on the king side, because every pawn is kind of protected of white. f6, knight goes to e2, knight goes to d4. You cannot capture because the rook is hanging. So we have bishop goes to f7, we have bishop to g4, rook goes to e8, we have knight to b5, knight goes to b6, knight goes over here, rook to a3 attacking the knight, and eventually e5, very strong move, creating a passed pawn, and eventually after e6, black resigned the game. Because you can't defend anything, because like the e8 square is already covered by the knight, and even if you try to play something like king to f8 with the idea of king e7, white can already play something like rook e3. With the idea of pushing up the pawn, if you try to block it, I can play knight f5 check. You have to go to f8 to protect the pawn, but simply pawn push. You come over here and I can take, I can even, like, knight d6 is even a mate. So you see why this position was completely winning. So white simply hammered this particular pawn, putting maximum pressure on it, forced black to defend the pawn, and eventually created some counterplay, like pushing up the e pawn and eventually winning the game. So you see how Anatoly Karpov simply tricked Joel Lottier in an equal middle game possession by using the minority attack, by pushing his fewer pawns, by exchanging the few pawns with the maximum pawns of your opponent, and eventually creating a weakness and target that weakness. So I think now you have got the idea of like why minority attack is important. Now I'm going to take out some tests. We are going to discuss 3 positions which are going to help you improve your particular minority attack understanding. So let's do it. Okay, so we have the first position on the board. Black just played the move queen to d6. Okay, so we are playing with white, so you can try to pause the video and try to think what is the winning move in this position. Like, how should white try to continue the possession? Okay, so in this particular position, you should play the move b5. Why? The idea still remains the same. You want to create a weakness. Black is having 2 options, either to take the pawn or to play something else. If black takes, black is already having 2 big weaknesses that white can simply hammer on, and white is already better. And if black doesn't play, like black plays something like rook c8 maybe, we can already take. And after it takes, you will once again realize the c6 pawn is weak, a7 pawn is weak, and you can already put your knight to c5 or even rook b7, jumping in with the pieces. And eventually, basically, now black is having 2 weaknesses in the position. So that's how you can easily target the pawns with the minority attack. So if you found the move b5, excellent. So yeah, this was the first position. So now let's move on to the second position. Okay, so we have the second position on the board. Black played the move rook to a8 in this particular position. So you can try to pause the video and try to think how are you going to continue the position if you're playing with the white pieces. Okay, so if you found out the move b5, congratulations. The idea is once again pretty clear. Black is once again having two options, either to take or not to take. So if black takes, once again we are having two weaknesses in the position that we can target on. And if black plays something else, we can simply take on c6. And even rook into c6 is completely winning. So you see how easily white can simply hammer up this particular position with the idea of b5, minority attack. So this was the second position. So now let's move on to the final position, the position number 3. Okay, so we have the third position on the board. White just played the move knight to b3. So try to pause the video and try to think how are you going to continue the position if you're playing with the black pieces. Okay, so if you found out the move b into c3, that's the correct way to continue. Now white is having two options, either take with the pawn or with the rook. If he takes with the pawn, c3 pawn is simply a backward pawn because you can't push because I can take it, and that's a permanent weakness. And if you take with the rook, now these two pawns are weakness. I can just move my queen and these two pawns remains weak forever, and black is already better in the future, in the end game. So you see how easily you can use this minority attack concept to basically create weaknesses in your opponent's camp and eventually have a better end game chances to win the game. So yeah, this is how we simply discussed this particular topic. So 3 things we discussed: what is minority attack, why it is important, and we have taken out some tests. And finally, the conclusion here is, let me say it once again. You know now what a minority attack is, why it is important, and how you can initiate and conduct a minority attack and more. So I hope this video was helpful to increase your middle game knowledge. If it was, make sure to like, share and subscribe, and make sure to share it with your friends who doesn't really know this particular concept. I hope that this video was helpful. So if you want any particular video on any particular topic, tell me in the comment box below and I'm going to make out a video on it. And make sure to tell me in the comments below how much you scored out of these 3 tests, out of these 3 puzzles. So I'm going to see you soon. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess, and bye bye.